Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's version of DevOpsDerek. Sorry about the late start time. I had a mini technical disaster just as I was going live. Today we have Sarah Lean. Hey, Sarah, how are you today?
I'm good, thanks, Derek. How you doing?
I'm good, minus the small technical implosion. But yeah, no, I'm good. I'm good. It's I would say it's sunny, but we both know it's not.
Yep.
We say we're both from Scotland. You'll tell from our accent. But yeah, it's so Sarah, you work at Microsoft as a senior cloud advocate. What's that like?
Yes. It's really good fun. It's a nice varied role where I get to interact with the community quite a bit in a variety of ways, doing stuff like this, writing blog posts, doing documentation, feeding back good and bad feedback from our customers and our audience back to our engineering teams. And yeah, at the moment I'm preparing to do some stuff for our virtual Ignite event later this month. So lots going on, lots to keep me busy, and lots to keep me out of trouble. So yeah, it's good fun.
Excellent. No, that's cool. It's very interesting. So you focus on a particular part of that journey, don't you?
Yeah, so I've been on my own journey, probably a bit like yourself, Derek, from being that traditional ops person to someone that now works in the cloud. And I like to talk to my customers or our customers about that migration journey that not only they are doing personally in terms of upskilling, but also professionally in terms of moving their servers, their applications, their workloads up into the cloud and running either as cloud only or as hybrid and doing stuff like that together as well. I think Derek has had a meltdown. Are you still there, Derek, or has your PC melted down and left us live? Awesome. Gotta love technology, people. Give us a shout if you are listening in today. Hopefully Derek will join us back again in a minute once his PC sorts himself out. But any questions, we're hoping to talk about Azure Migrate and talk about that and some of the functions and capabilities. I know Derek was quite keen to question me about some stuff. So yeah, if you're listening, please do give us a shout out and we can answer those questions. Are you back?
I am sorry about that. Looks like we had that same technical issue. Interesting. Apologies. I've done the switch over from a MacBook to my new Dell XPS, and it's been smooth all day. And of course, as soon as I go live on camera, it has a mini meltdown. But yeah, no, it is. See that traditional move, like about yourself. Obviously, I come from ops, and that migration from on-premise to the cloud, it's not something to be taken lightly. Like everybody's like, yeah, the cloud. I love it, right? Obviously I've been using Azure since 2013, 2014, because my journey was I had on-premise data centers, and I used to love, you go in and you'd see all the lights and the whirring of the fans.
Yep.
It was my home, like it was like it made me nice, and like there was something peaceful about it, right? I don't know what it is, but I used to love going in. You would get a disc, someone would turn up with a disc, you would go in and replace it. Saying that there's a few misplaced discs, but yeah, so like that, and then eventually, I went on to another organisation. They still had their own data centres, and they were dotted around London. And then what happened was I actually moved to Australia.
Okay.
And when I lived in Melbourne, like I was heading up a technical services team. What I did there was hosting and support for Sitecore, Umbraco, Drupal, etc. And the thing is obviously I'd been used to doing it, and I'd done a comparison to Azure at the time, and I was like, oh, this is really good. But what I was forced to, because I was fun fact actually. It was when Australia launched. Microsoft Australia launched Azure in Sydney and Melbourne. I was at the launch party, and so it was a day at Microsoft in Sydney, and I flew up for it. I'm sitting in the room, and who walks in? Scott Guthrie. So obviously I'm just sitting there like, I'm just a little guy, right? And I was like, Scott Guthrie's here. So it was like Deloitte, like directors from Deloitte were all there. I'm just sitting there like, yeah. And I've never felt so out of place, but at the same time, it's launched. And then that was, I kind of, everything I launched was Azure on in Australia, because it's such a strong footprint. And then obviously like that, from there, I've just been, so for the past 6 years, I've been 100% cloud now. Because just with the way things are now, data centers cost so much money and time and whatnot. And everybody thinks it's cheaper, but I know, if you're out like in London, right?
Mhm.
If you live in London, there's a good case for data centers, because there's a lot of them around are cheap, but it's getting there. It's, you're having to go and take a full, an engineer now is what on, say, the cost is probably $100 an hour, £100 an hour. So if you add in the cost of the disk, suddenly it's probably going to cost about £800 to replace a failed disk. That's just not doable now. It isn't.
Yeah.
So this is where, and that's the thing. So obviously you've got that where you are moving on, and I think that's where Azure Migrate takes in. So how does that work? Like, is there different stages of the migration?
Yeah, so there's different parts that Azure Migrate can actually help you with, and let me see if we can switch to the right slide. But it's been around since 2017, and it's been generally available since February 2018. So it's got a longevity in terms of being a product in our line, and it can be used for lots of different scenarios. And some of the scenarios that we can actually cover are things like server migration. So if you're generally just lifting and shifting, although I don't tend to like that phrase, you can move your servers with it. You can discover them. You can have a look at what's happening. And you can also discover things like your databases, what's happening on-prem in terms of your databases. We've even got VDI migration capabilities now. There's web app migration, and we've obviously got that raw data that everybody has. But in a migration, regardless of why you're migrating, size of your company, size of your organization, what industry you're in, there's really 3 case stages to this whole project for yourself. And the first one is discovery. And you really have to understand what's in your environment, right? Because let's face it, as techies, we all say we know our environment, we know everything that lives there, but probably you don't. And I think I've done this exercise with customers where we've sent out a kind of scan of their environment and always found something that they forgot about, didn't know about, or thought had been decommissioned, but someone had sneakily hidden it in the corner, or it was away under somebody's desk hiding. And the discovery piece is really about understanding what's in your environment so as you can look at what's happening and strategize from there, and once you've done that discovery piece, you can do the assessment. So you've discovered everything that's in your environment, you know all the servers, you know all the key components, the technologies that you have. You can now start to assess what can be moved, what can't be moved, and how it can be moved, and what it's going to cost you, right? And people say, why do I need to spend the time doing the discovery? And why can't I just move everything? Why can't I just strategize? And I'm of the old school, maybe nature, that you have to have a good overview of what's happening within your environment before you can strategize. I've seen some customers say, we're moving to the cloud and we're going PaaS. And then halfway through the migration, they find some legacy technology, Derek, that can't go PaaS. It just can't. It needs to live on a traditional operating system, and sometimes even has to live on something really old like Server 2008 R2. And they're stuck. And then they have to pedal back, and they have to go up to their SLT or their leadership board and go, we can't go all cloud. We need to keep that data center, and we need to keep 4 servers, and we need to buy new hardware, and we need to, run on legacy software that's not, secure. It's not best practice, but that's what we've got. And they suddenly lose face, right? Because that's a horrible place to be in when you've said to your LT, you're going PaaS, and then you have to go and backpedal, right? So I'm of the big school of discover, assess, and look at what's happening in your environment and get all that information and then strategize. And then that way you don't have egg on your face, and you know the right path, and you know where you're going, and you can budget appropriately. Because There's different ways you can pay for the cloud, and there's obviously different ways that you pay on-prem as well when you're running that infrastructure. So different ways to manage your budget, and you have to juggle all of that. So Azure Migrate can help you with that discovery, can help you with that assessment, and obviously can help you with the migration as well. So that's a really long way of answering your question, Derek, but hopefully that makes sense.
I like it. Very detailed. Because the thing is, I'm going through my architect exam, so I've been looking at it. I've not don't have anything to migrate, unfortunately. So this is what I was really excited about today's session. You know the math. Sorry, the obviously the migration cloud advocate. So that's the thing, because you could. So I mean, what does a typical migration look like? So you've done your discovery. I imagine that involves installing some software.
So to do the discovery, you can do it in different ways, and it depends on what you're discovering. So if you're discovering, say, a VMware environment or a Hyper-V environment, you install what we call an appliance. So you build a new server or repurpose another one and put our software on top of that. And that server will then plug into your hypervisor layer, whether it be VMware or Hyper-V, and interrogate your servers from there. And you don't necessarily need to install a bit of software on all your servers. You can get some high-level information from that hypervisor level. If you're just assessing physical servers, so legacy tin, legacy servers sitting there, you do have to install a bit of software on every server, unfortunately, because there's obviously not a virtualization layer you can plug into. The one thing that a bit of people get confused about is how we can assess servers that live on other clouds. Because let's face it, people have been using other clouds either as a strategy decision, you know, they've went down the AWS route and are now moving to Azure, or people have been sneakily using it and nobody knew, right? It was running on somebody's credit card. So if you're in that situation and you want to consolidate into one cloud, you can actually use Azure Migrate to assess those AWS virtual machines or GCP or wherever they may be. You just treat them as if they're physical bits of server. So you install that agent and it pulls in the information. Now, there is a tiny caveat. So the server appliances pull that high-level information, so IP addresses, cores, memory, you know, operating system levels, the kind of the detail you would see at a hypervisor level. What you do need to install a bit of software on every server to understand is the dependencies. So how do your servers talk to each other? Because again, let's face it, our servers don't work independently. They talk to different places. You know, our web front ends talk to our database backends. They talk to our Active Directory servers. They maybe talk to print servers or Exchange servers. So what you need to do is discover all of that. So when you're trying to do your migration, you group everything. You don't want to leave stuff behind and, you know, leave its poor little friend on-prem when everything up is in the cloud. So you do have to sometimes install an agent on each of your servers to do that dependency mapping. And it is a hard task, right? I'm not going to say that it's not a hard task, but it's worth the effort from what you get back from it. It gets all that discovery data. It gets all of that. Ports that you're using, are you using port 53? Are you using some obscure high-level port that you need to have open within your Azure network? And then you can start to really plan and really get down to the nitty-gritty of what you need in terms of your Azure network, and you maybe don't need as well, if that makes sense.
No, yeah. And Azure networking is something that is the core of everything. It's something I see people kind of, it's funny because with everyone, I'm quite lucky in that coming from that traditional ops, I have to, you know, learn about subnetting and subnetting. But like that, it's, you know, obviously when you, because that's the thing, is like this idea of networking as software effectively, that, you know, like for people coming in, that's still quite, it's a lot of information to wrap you up. So does Azure Migrate do some of that for you and like give you some best practices around that?
Not necessarily. It gives you the information that you can then use to do that networking. Part of me wishes that it would give me all that networking and tell me how to design my networks, but then the other half of me remembers that that's why I'm in a job, Derek, is to interrogate that data and then design it. So as much as it would be nice if Azure Migrate built me all of that and told me what firewall rules I needed to open, it doesn't. It gives me the information and then I have to go and do that design document and then the implementation. So yeah, it's a bit of work for me, but it keeps me in a job as well. So
That's it. Like networking is still networking. That hasn't changed, and I don't think it ever will really. Because like it's interesting you saying about physical servers. That feels like such a dated concept. Do you get a lot of them?
oh yeah, we've got customers that have got a lot of them. Some are running things like, the badges that let people access the buildings and stuff like that, and they've built in
Right.
redundancy, or there's some weird card reader or card printer to print off people's badges hanging off these physical bits of server. Or yeah, people have been too precious and said, oh, you can't migrate it. It doesn't migrate to virtual, and it doesn't. And there's 10 still sitting there. So yeah, there is still stuff kicking about. Or the classic one, Derek, as I'm sure you've come across it many a time, is PCs that have been converted into servers for development environments that suddenly
Yeah.
become mad production environments. So
And it's not just that, it's the server, like the one about you were saying earlier on about discovery. I was thinking about that old server that sits in the basement and no one really knows what it does. But when you turn it off, stuff breaks. And you don't know what it is. So you turn it back on and you're just like, yeah, I'm just going to leave that. But see what
yeah,
you're saying about old dev boxes, I would see them dotted around the office. And they used to drive me crazy because you had no real input as a sysadmin then to be able to do anything about it. But at the same time as you also need to be in charge of the real estate. And like when going through that migration, because when you say it's funny you're saying about lift and shift earlier on, I don't like it.
mm.
I prefer the term move and improve.
Yeah.
It's it's so true because because this is what it's funny with migrations. I always think um, it's a time that you can use wisely to re-architect. Because like for instance, I used to always my favorite time of year was always that bit in between Christmas and New Year, because that's when you could do the migrations. People, because so you have to restart something, you have to email
Yeah.
everybody. Here's a little trick for you. Actually, what I used to do, see, like people, I had to tell them when I was doing stuff. I would put in the subject stuff like free cookies, free pizza, because that way they would actually open it up.
Nice.
And then they can't complain. Oh, you never told us about this. Like I told you 3 times. And it's that sort of time as well. So I mean, obviously, I'd imagine, obviously, with startups starting in the cloud, and then you've got things like for instance, like Lloyd's TSB,
Mhm.
like, oh, sorry, Lloyd's now. I think I'm showing my age there. Like Lloyd's, that sort of them moving something like that into something like Azure. That's a 10-year journey
Oh yeah.
versus, that's the thing. So, what's the? I think here's a question for you actually. What's the longest migration you've saw yet?
Um, there's an ongoing one. I started at Microsoft, 2.5 years ago, and the customer was already in a year-long project. So that's them 3.5 years. And they haven't got by the discovery stage. They're just redoing their discovery because there's a new leadership team.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and some of the stuff we uncovered on the first discovery, Derek, is horrendous, and it shouldn't be running because it's so old and it's so unsecure and unpatched and unmanaged, and admin password is the way to get into it. Yeah. And if I could tell you the name, you'd be even more frightened by who it was. So yeah, there's some companies that are going to struggle big time to undo all of the legacy mess that they have,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But I think they're going to have to. Personally, I think they're going to have to do that. They're going to have to go through the pain. They're going to have to go through that big budget that's going to take it in order to stay afloat. I don't think they're going to be able to manage to continue on doing stuff that they need to if their tech's running on Windows Server 2000, 2008 and stuff like that, and could be hacked and isn't up to what we're all trying to do nowadays with IT and what we need to be able to do with IT.
Yeah. It's interesting because it does make me question that, because that's the thing is because I have a bank, one of the new internet banks, and they Monzo had this microservice.
Mhm.
Let me just get this up. Actually, it is quite an interest, because it did make me wonder, right? Um, with the Monzo one, um, It really did, because they've moved. They don't have that legacy where they have to, keep systems online that were created. Let's be honest. Like I am not. I am not a young man. I am not a young man, and it's funny because you have this obviously traditional approach to IT where like you would have to do it, but you've now got microservices, right?
Mhm.
And this is a network diagram of microservices, right?
Wow.
You're just like, how? How is this a network diagram? This is the firewall rules, depending on what is connecting to what.
How do you troubleshoot that?
I have no idea. See, I done a webinar recently on microservices, and I love the idea of it, but
Mm.
I can see how it can quickly get out of hand.
Oh, yeah.
Where you move from one hell where you have everything consolidated to a point where you have everything's a microservice, and you just, I mean, like, how do you even deal with that? It's
Yeah.
it's frightening. It is frightening. Anyway, I think I've went a little bit off topic.
It's all right.
But yeah, so let's go back here. So what's the next stage after assess?
It's to really look at that phase, and once you do all the assessment, you've got all the kind of details. I've kind of got a demo of what the assessment data will look like if you want to see some of that, Derek, and show you some of that. So let's have a wee.
Let's have a look.
I will skip ahead. This is a pre-prepared video because doing a migration takes days, and let's face it, nobody wants to watch a live stream of us watching progress bars, so I have recorded my demo. What we've done here is discovered some servers, and we've discovered servers in AWS. So these are 2 EC2 servers living in AWS, and I've discovered them with Azure Migrate. So what we want to do is start to look at some of this data and actually interrogate it and look at what's happening. Now, in my environment, I only have 2 servers, so the detail of what I have isn't very much, but obviously in a live environment, you would have it. But this is the dependency map and stuff that you get to see. You get to see what ports this server is talking out to. So again, this is where you can start to define your networking. You get to see the processes that these servers are running. When they start to talk to each other, you can see there's clients talking into these different services. And that's when you start to group all of your servers, right? You start to see how these servers all talk together. And again, I've had customers who have said, we've got like 5 servers that make up this web app and backend database. And then we discover when we do the dependency mapping that there's more happening. There's more servers in that group. So it's good to do all of that. Now, once you've got that dependency mapping happening, what you really want to start to look at is the costing and how you would move these virtual machines into Azure. And this assessment report has lots of different properties that we can configure. We can configure things and say, we're going to move our workloads into the UK South data center. We want to base it on performance-based information. And here, when we talk about performance-based information, that's Azure Migrate has ran in your environment and collected how heavy or how light your server workloads are, and are going to size your workloads appropriately. Because let's face it, we've all oversized our workloads in Azure, or sorry, on-prem. And what we don't want to do is oversize them in Azure. We want to size them correctly so we can use performance-based data collected by Azure Migrate to pick the right Azure virtual machine size for our environment. And here we can start to build up this report. We can start to say some information and see what's going to happen when we move our workloads into Azure, and get some of that costing that our leadership teams really want to understand, and then use that to drive some of our decisions and some of our design metrics as well. So we pick the servers that we want to assess, and obviously in this environment, it's only the 2 servers that we have. So we're going to look at those. Once the report comes back, and it can take a wee while for this report to generate, depending on how many servers you're assessing. Again, I'm assessing 2, so it's going to be really quick in terms of generation. But what happens is it brings back an assessment for us, and it starts to give us some data that we can interact with in terms of what's happening with our environment. So we can actually see things like Azure readiness or monthly cost estimate. We can also see our storage monthly cost estimate as well. Now, the Azure readiness is about whether that VM is actually something that can be moved into Azure. Now, my 2 virtual machines can be moved into Azure. Sometimes what you'll see is ready with conditions, and that is around things like maybe we've been able to detect that it's a Linux workload, but we're not sure which version of Linux that it's running, and you have to go off and manually check that we support that version of Linux, or we don't support that version of a Linux. So really, that ready with conditions is just a flag for you to go and check something. It doesn't necessarily mean that you don't or you can't move your server to Azure. Now, the detail that we're getting back from this report is saying things like CPU utilization is 100%, and that's where it's basing its performance-based data on the size of our virtual machine that we want to use when we move it to Azure. So obviously it's undersized or overutilized in AWS currently, so when we move it to Azure, we're going to have to size it appropriately or size it something that works a little bit better for that workload. This report can obviously be exported, so you can export all of this into an Excel spreadsheet and have a look at all of that. And then obviously take that and report it back into your management team. But on the portal, it's interactable, so you can drill into it, you can recreate it. And what I say to most people is to do a couple of these assessments. You've got that raw data, so use the assessment and price up different things. Price up things with reserved instances, without reserved instances, and price it up when it's in the UK data center, when it's maybe in the US data center, if you can do that. There's lots of different capabilities that you can change and use it around. So definitely take advantage of what Azure Migrate can do in terms of giving you that rich reporting data to see what's happening as well. I think we've lost Derek again. He must have.
Yeah,
you here?
No, I was really engrossed actually. I was really engrossed in your
That's okay.
presentation. It's quite interesting because you don't
It's not like a
actually.
Scottish person to be quiet, Derek.
Oh, this is true. This is true, and it's interesting. Obviously, both of us being Scottish, we were talking about this before. We need to make sure that we speak the Queen's English, and not just "Hi, how you doing, big man?" So yeah, it's interesting because the thing is, I think this comes back to the foundations of cloud, because it's funny, like everybody talks about cloud, and it is great. But it's not as cheap as some people think, and I think that's something that it does surprise some folk.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if cost is your driver for moving out a data center into the cloud, you're probably going to be shocked by what you're seeing. And especially since a lot of organizations don't really know the true cost of what their current data center costs them. Like you said earlier, there's a lot of hidden costs around what happens in your data center, all that overtime that some people do. Some people don't. Sometimes the IT department doesn't pay for the electricity in the building, but they consume a lot of that, and that they have to think about that because that's what Azure charges you for as well. Things like keeping the lights on, things like cooling, as well as stuff like that. So there's a lot of hidden cost often with a data center, and then when you look at Azure and compare it, it can maybe look like more expensive as well.
Yeah, because that's the thing is like you're absolutely spot on. Like electricity, you're looking. I would average probably about £40, £50 a month on a server. Like I've got a Dell PowerEdge T620 with 192 gig of RAM. I've got one of those little when you put it in, you can see the power consumption. It's roughly about half of my electricity bill per month. If you suddenly think about that as if you're running hundreds of these things, it's expensive. But the thing I love about cloud though is it doesn't have to be always on. You can scale it down. You can scale it up as in that's people don't see the cost saving with the scaling up. They only see the cost saving sometimes I find with the scaling down. Because scaling up, not only you're paying more money, right? But you're not having a website or an ordering system that's coming to a shuddering halt because too many people are trying to get that special day sale. You can just ramp it up and just be like, we're paying more money, but that means more people are hitting our website, which is generating more income. And what people don't always factor in is the reputation loss that comes with a website being down, or like for instance, if you went to Amazon, right, and like as in the buying stuff, to your house. If that suddenly came to a shuddering halt, I don't have the patience to wait. I would go somewhere else, or is there even anywhere else? That's obviously that's something else. But like that, like
Yeah.
I don't have the patience, and it's funny because I was talking to someone recently, right, and we were talking about how how you deal with the internet. How did we deal with the internet on 56K modem? And it was like with a lot of patience, and but now patience is just went right out the window.
Yeah.
No one has it anymore.
I know it's yeah. I think in terms of that reputational conversation we were having, probably one of the really bad examples, especially in the UK, is Ticketmaster when we all want concert tickets. Not that we're going to concerts right now, but they are horrendous for not being able to deal with the scale of the ticket demand. And I often wonder why they haven't done something better by now, because it's been a few times they've been crucified for it, and you see it on your Twitter feed and you see it trending, and you just think, who's not paying the IT bill like
Exactly.
to deal with that? And yeah, you're right. The reputational damage is just far too big when things like that go wrong. So yeah, it's and even, a weird thing I was trying to do today. All my car, I've got a Mazda, and all my service book, I don't know if this is what everybody does now, is on an app. And the app used to be something you could download on your phone, or you could go onto the website and have a look at it. So I don't have a logbook with when my last service was and what mileage I had, Derek. I've got it all in an app. So I remember seeing an email a couple of weeks ago saying they were taking the website away and you just had to use the app. And I thought, well, that's a bit rubbish, because not everybody has a phone that can have apps, but okay, we'll go with it. Today I logged on the app and they said it was down while they transitioned to the new app. So I can't see when my last car service was. I can't see how much mileage that I need to have and when I need to book that in.
Yeah.
And I know that's a small and insignificant inconvenience, but that's just ridiculous in terms of what we need to have. And I think that they've really got that bad. And I'm probably going to write an email, like a strongly worded email to customer service about how inconvenienced I am. But that's a great idea of why technology isn't great when they do things like that, and they haven't obviously thought about the dependency that some people have on that. And I've went on a weird rant now, Derek, but yeah.
No, it's good. You're on the. The thing is I think we're spoiled a little bit, right? Because things with technology are so convenient. When they aren't that convenient, then suddenly there's huge impacts, and I think as we get faster and better with technology, then more people really struggle when there is an outage. Because it's funny, like I remember, like obviously running websites was what I did for such a long time, and I remember being on call, and obviously it's like you get those. Oh, we want to pay $100 a month. Like, yeah, that's not how it works, really. Like, yeah, you can do that, but it's not an organizational thing. But the thing is running something like that now, like, and it's interesting because I used to do small hosting, but I would say to them, I'll go on call for free if you pay the money that you're going to pay me to be on call into the technology stack, which won't go down, which means I don't want to be on call. I hate being on call. Like, it's because there's something I used to when I was on call. There was we used to use Blackberries, and I am so thankful that for the most part Blackberry is gone, because see that ringtone. That ringtone is like it still gives me shudders. I remember because the amount of times I would be woken up at 3 in the morning and have to trudge to my laptop and fix something. Yeah,
not good.
It's not. But anyway, sorry, I think we'll get sidetracked again. So obviously, you can use these tools to do a discovery assessment, and then you do your migrate. One of the things that I'd love to know is with the data, how are you moving large amounts of data there? Like for instance, obviously you've got some file servers which have terabytes of data.
So I think there's a couple of ways you can actually migrate your large parts of data. There's different ways of doing it. So we've got like file sync servers. You could gradually start to sync things up slowly across your network. Obviously, you need to watch that you don't saturate and bring down your whole company and stop everybody checking the BBC News. And then there's other ways. So you've got, in terms of data box, you've got the big data boxes that look like big chunky PCs just full of disks that can take lots and terabytes of data. The one thing with DataBox is it's a great service. You know, you order a DataBox or you order a DataBox disk if you want something smaller. They'll ship it out from one of the Azure centers. It'll come to your office. You'll be able to plug that in. You'll upload the data into it. You'll then ship it back across to the Azure data center. We'll upload that, put it up into Azure, and then you'll have that data across, which is fantastic in terms of being able to transfer all of that data using DataBox. But there's a time lag, right? So it takes you a couple of days to maybe upload the data, a couple of days to post it to Azure, and then a couple of days for us to upload it. So your data could be like 5 or 6 days away from where you are. And if you've just consumed and wrote extra data on top of all that, petabytes or terabytes of data, whatever you've got, you're suddenly out of sync, and you have to have that technology to be able to sync it. So DataBox is great for maybe those large scale migrations that you need to move of legacy data. And then, but trying to look at uploading your data through an internet pipe is probably the better one for a lot of workloads, unfortunately, which is where it's going to take the time. And you have to, that's again where your discovery and your assessment looks at, because your discovery shouldn't just be about what servers and workloads you've got, but looking at your underlying infrastructure, like how fast your broadband is. If you're going to move to the cloud, you're going to have to rely on your broadband. So you need to look at upgrading that potentially to a bigger line and stuff like that, and maybe having 2 or 3 different lines installed so that you can do the upload and then run the cloud and have dependencies as well. So moving large amounts of data can be tricky depending on what it is and how often you use it, and how often you want to be able to use it.
It's interesting. It is interesting. Would something like ExpressRoute be beneficial for people doing migrations?
Yes and no. ExpressRoute won't give you any faster connection, I don't think, in terms of uploading it, but what it will give you is that more secure line, Derek. It'll give you that kind of encapsulated or encrypted or whatever word you want to use, where the data is not going over the public internet. It's actually going across a secure line. So yeah, it depends on what you're doing and moving at the same time as well. But I think the confusion is, does Azure, like the ExpressRoute, speed up your upload speed? Probably won't, might a wee bit, because obviously it's a secure line, but yeah, it's not going to make it any faster, I don't think.
The good thing is it's not contended, so you don't have, wee Dave down on YouTube watching us, obviously on YouTube.
Yeah.
I'm finding out about Azure Migrate, but we're doing a migration, but we're slowing down the migration. Anyway, we've got a question from Deep Start. If using Azure Migrate, if I was to perform an initial sync to seed the data and then run it again, would it pick up any changes since the last sync?
So Azure Migrate doesn't have that capability. It's something that a lot of people have asked for, and I'm hopeful if I go and look, there's probably a user voice that we can upvote to get that. It is something everybody's asked for. We don't have it built into Azure Migrate at the moment, but we have it in terms of DataBox and DataBox migrations as well. We have that kind of seeding happening. And obviously some of our technology can take care of that. Certain SQL setups can take care of that initial seeding, and then obviously right on top of it, some of our file sync services within Windows Server can do it. But yeah, Azure Migrate can't at the moment.
That's cool. That's cool. So yeah, no, that's a good question, because that's the thing is because it's the idea, because I remember finding out about the data box the first time. I'm like, I'm loading up some data and then shipping this over. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like, but I love the idea of it. I want to use it. I'm going to just get, what I'm going to do? I'm going to purchase it, right, and just move like 2 gigs so I can get one of the data boxes, because you only pay for the usage. You don't have to buy the data box, do you?
So it depends on what you're using. So there's the data box, which you can just, it's obviously higher, obviously gets sent to you. Now, if you go for the smaller ones, for some of the data disks, you have to buy the disk and then ship it. So yeah, with the data box, you don't purchase it. We just ship it out. You upload your stuff, ship it back, and then we clean it, and that's it. All good. That's what you pay for. With the smaller ones, you have to pay for the disk, and that's the shame, because I've got tons and tons of photos on an old PC, or photies if we're being Scottish, that I want to upload into Azure just to keep away from, accidentally deleting or hard disks spinning. And that's been the thing. I've not got enough to actually get a data box.
So, do you know, whilst you're doing this, I'm Googling stuff, right? I want to know what this thing looks like.
You mean you're binging it?
Yeah, sorry, apologies. Yes, I'm binging it. So, wait a minute, right? So, I think it looks. Let me see. Right, let me see. Share. Here we go. So, is this it?
Yes, so that's one of them. Yep. Looks like a PC. I know.
I want one of those. Do you know, it's one of those things like, I hope it comes with a British plug.
I hope so too.
But no, that's really cool, actually.
They are shipped from your region. So there's I don't know the specifics, but you can't ship it across regions. So we would get one from a UK data center. If you were in, say, Amsterdam or whatever, you would get one from a European data center. So yeah, we have rules about cross shipping or border shipping or region shipping. I can't remember what we quite call it. So yeah, we should get a UK plug, Derek.
Yeah. The thing is that there's also data regulations you need to work, like shipping stuff into the US versus shipping stuff here. And then we're at that sort of grey area with Brexit where we don't seem to get all the goodness now that we used to get with data privacy in the region. But yeah, that's really cool. It's really cool. So, I mean, how long would you say is a typical migration take? Like, say, for instance, you're a kind of medium-sized business, maybe 400 or 500 servers, mix of Linux, Windows, team of maybe 5 or 6. What do you think an average migration would take there?
You're probably looking at least a year, if not a wee bit more, Derek. And I'm saying that for a variety of reasons, because let's face it, if you're doing it as an in-house IT team, you're probably running your business as usual activities as well as learning how to use Azure, as well as learning how to migrate. And that's going to be a lot of work, as we know from being in IT ops. Running projects and doing business as usual is never fun, and there's never enough time in the day. So yeah, you're probably looking at least a year for potentially that. And again, it'll depend on the criticality of your workloads. Can you migrate everything maybe in a weekend or whatever, because you can do that, or do you need to stage it because it's so critical and you need to have small windows of downtime and you have risk? So yeah, so for some projects, I'd always recommend maybe looking at bringing in a partner, somebody that does data center migrations as their specialist subject, because let's face it, there are some companies out there that do migrations every project. That's their thing. They do one migration, they move on to the next, they move on to the next, and keep going. So these people can bring in specialist skills in terms of knowing the gotchas with your migrations. They can, get over that learning curve because they already know how to do a migration. They've done it before. But they don't have the learnings of your internal systems. So you do need to give some of your staff across to that. And obviously you'll be running it after they migrate it. So you need to train your staff as well. So there's lots to consider. So another long answer to a simple question.
No, it's really detailed. Because the thing is as well, like one of the things that I did one with Gregor Sooty, it was about certifications as well. So that's something you probably want to do as well. Not only just train your staff, but make sure they're up to speed with everything on Azure.
Yep. And that's sometimes what I say you should be discovering as well, looking at who's been maybe learning Azure in their back bedroom, at nights or whatever, and doing a bit like what Gregor's done and dedicated a lot of spare time to getting certifications, and look who's not been able to do that, and then dedicate some time to them and help the others as well. So you should really be discovering who's got the skill set for Azure and who doesn't, and making them go forward as well.
Yeah, because that's the thing. I mean, when you look at it, it's got everything that's already there. It's just moving it over and making sure, obviously, you get the right sort of tools.
Mm.
Got another question from Deep Star. We're
Yep.
in a similar situation. We've not got a lot of data for DataBox, so would the best approach to be migrate certain folders at a time?
Potentially. Again, it'll depend on how you use them and how you set that up. Because what you don't want to do is have maybe two file servers and everybody getting confused about which file server they need to go for folder A and which file server they need to go for folder B. If of course we're talking about a file server here. So yeah, you could potentially do that, but then it might give you a lot of support issues and a lot of end user training you need to go through. So yeah, depends on how you're set up. There is a calculator. I'll need to dig it out the link. I don't know where it is, but there is a calculator that can kind of tell you how quick it will take you to upload your data. And it will give you that kind of return on investment about which way you should be going and how you do all of that. And it can be often quite good to just see that in the flesh and say, it's going to take me 450 days to upload this. We really need to do something different, or it's actually going to take us 6 days. If we do over a couple of hours a day, we could probably live with that and live with that transition period. So yeah, I'll try and dig that out and get that link shared.
Awesome. Because there's ways to do it as well. I'd imagine you'd be able to have like that hot, cold, like the hot, cool side of things, where you migrate something over to like an Azure file share, and then have bits kind of moving back. So yeah, that would be quite cool.
I suppose it all depends on what it is you're migrating and what that is. If it's a file server, you probably can live with that transition. But if it's a file share that integrates with an app, probably not.
I think the trickiest thing would be a database.
Yes.
That would be, I think, like large scale databases I'd imagine would be a nightmare, because there's no way you're doing that without downtime.
Yeah. I wonder often if you could get away with it by looking at things like stretched clusters. Now, databases isn't my thing, Derek. I'm not a DBA. I can build you a SQL server and I can do you some basic tasks. But if that's the case, that you've got a big server, a SQL server, if we're talking SQL, and you want to migrate it, maybe you look at building a cluster with one of your nodes in Azure and then have it seeding slowly in the background. And then eventually you just flip over. And then suddenly your live is in Azure and your production or your backup's back on-prem, or even another one in Azure as well. So there's different ways. I want to say skin the cat. I think that's a good Scottish phrase, but there's different ways of doing it. And that's where your discovery and will really come into play about what's there. And you should really be making this a whole project for your IT team. Don't just make it an operations thing that you have to do and take on. Make sure you're speaking to your DBAs, make sure you're speaking to your devs, make sure you're speaking to people in finance, people in HR that use these applications, and speak to them about when they can have it down and when they can have things down and what your playtime right is like. And even, I'm sure you're the same, Derek. I've worked in companies where we're supposed to be in charge of the IT and we're supposed to buy everything, and everything's supposed to come through our budget and stuff. And then all of a sudden HR chap on the door and go, could you meet Steve here? He's here to install the new HR tool. And you're like, what? And suddenly you've got a new HR tool you've not had any, and you've got to suddenly find a server for, because they've suddenly went off and bought weird, wonderful tools that you didn't know about. So definitely check in with that, because that could be happening when you're planning a migration and someone else is planning a brand new tool, and you're going to clash at some point. So
My favourite one is similar. Is, hey, meet Steve. He's the new developer. He's going to be sat over there. Where's his laptop? Like, what?
Yep.
Oh, I guess I'm busy today then. Suddenly, that could turn into a whole different talk show. Mumps and grumps about IT. But it's so true, because that's it, and that's where the flexibility of cloud really does help, because at the end of the day, you're in a situation where you need more servers. It's an ARM template away, or if you're a clicker, then it's a couple of clicks away, and that is the core things. But it is interesting to see, and like that, the migrate stuff really has came on over the past couple of years, and it does really help IT pros like yourself to plan, discover, assess, and then migrate in the end. And then at that point, then everything's obviously really easy. But yeah, because it is easier, but it's also not easier at the same time, because like that like on premise as well, you've got subnets and you've got firewalls between devices. So making that jump sometimes can be a bit of a leap of faith, which is interesting.
Yep, absolutely. It's a whole different kettle of fish, but that's what makes it fun, right? We're constantly learning, it's constantly changing, and we constantly have to keep on our toes. So that's what keeps me in the industry, at least. So
I love it. I won't lie. There's a reason why I'm up here at 10 to 9 talking about Azure Migrate, whilst I'm missing the Scotland game. But yeah, I think on that note as well, we are coming towards the end of today's session. Is there anything you'd like to add, Sarah?
no, I've got a final slide that should show, if you want to read more about Azure Migrate, there's some links and some documentation there. What I'll do is I'll find that calculator about uploading and stuff in versus a data box, and I'll add it into that link. So check that out, and I'll hopefully get that for you tonight or tomorrow, and add that in as well. But thank you for having me, Derek. It's been good fun.
No, thank you very much for coming on. I learned a bunch as well. I'll probably use some of that in my exam. But honestly, Sarah, thanks so much for coming along. Loved it. It was really enjoyable. But okay, so that's the end of today's session. I'll be back next week with Paul Broadwith. He comes from Chocolate. He's a senior software engineer there. Yeah, we're going to be talking about PowerShell and some other bits yet that I need to think about and actually design a plan for. But Sarah, thank you so much. Thanks so much for coming along. It was much appreciated.
No worries. Cheers, Derek.
Cheers. Thanks, everybody. Bye.